to Selsor, and today I'm going to talk about alternative firing methods you can do in a raku kiln. I've been experimenting with raku firings since 1960s that would be about for 45 years, and I first started firing raku with Paul Soldner at Wallingford Art Center in Pennsylvania, and that really hooked me after that. So that's been my passion mostly in ceramics. So we're going to be demonstrating horsehair firing, which does not have any glazes and no smoke. There is some smell. We're going to be doing sagger firings, which has some fumes that you should be aware of, and that goes to 1650 and it uses saggers. We're going to be doing Ovara firing, which also goes to 1650, and there is no smoke with that, and the only smell smells like a bakery. And then there is raku firing, which has some smoke and some smell and fumes. So that's what we're going to be doing, so let's get started. When you're using a raku kiln, the basic equipment you need is the fuel. So most people use portable propane tank, a kiln that can fire quickly, made out of good insulated bricks or fiber, and combustion chambers for reducing, or a bed of sand for some of the other techniques. There's lots of different types of raku kilns available. You can get a commercial one or you could build your own. Today we're going to be using one built by Bracker's, a Bracker fiber raku kiln. And one of the things I wanted to talk about fiber is it needs to be sealed because it's a very bad carcinogenic material. And the one on the Bracker kiln, David Sturm, who built it, he sealed it with a solution of sodium silicate and water. So that is one way of sealing it. You can also buy ITC or rigidizer, and that will seal the fiber and keep it from getting around in the air. The other thing, you need to be able to tell the temperatures of the different firings, so you need a pyrometer, and you need it to go up to at least 2,000 degrees. You can find the pyrometers at ceramic suppliers or on eBay, or nationally there's ceramic suppliers will ship. For the tanks and burners, you want to have either, you can use a weed burner, the Red Dragon from Bracker's. You can use a commercial burner, Venturi burners, Mark Ward burners. You need a connection. I personally have 2 tanks set up per burner so that it doesn't freeze up when I'm firing a lot. Or you can use just a big tank, or you can use a barbecue burner or a tank of gas. So there's a lot of different methods you can use. It all depends on how much you're firing and in one day, and how much gas you need, and how much your burners take the vapor off the propane. It also helps if you have a regulator on your tank. I fire at 3.5 pounds usually on my burners. When you're getting your combustion chambers ready, you need to have a trash can with a tight-fitting lid. They need to be fireproof, so they should be made out of metal. Big metallic paint cans work well, and if you turn them upside down and stick them in straw or in sand, so they're sealed, that works. So if you need to have a lot of buckets ready, you can use things like that. And use things like newspaper, dried leaves, sawdust, straw inside, but it has to be a tight-fitting lid so it doesn't leak and keep burning. It needs to be airtight. Okay, when you're doing the Ovara firing and you're dipping the pot into the wheat solution and then into the water solution, and it can be a plastic bucket because it's a really fast thing. You're not having a hot piece of pottery sit in there. So the plastic buckets will work for the Ovara. So we're going to talk about safety equipment and precautions you need to take when you're working around a hot kiln. You should have your hair tied back so it's not going to get singed. You should have safety glasses to protect you from infrared waves for your eyes. So if you're looking into the kiln, you should have a heat shield for your mask or for your face. Now some come with a screen and that reflects the heat. Some come with a plastic that reflects the heat, and also the infrared waves as well. So not this one, but there's darker ones. You need an apron. This one is a fireman's apron, and it is fire resistant. These are Kevlar gloves. They're heat resistant. They work very well, and also welding gloves will work. So these are welding gloves. And then the raku tongs to pull the pieces out. These particular ones have points on them. The clothing should be made out of a natural material like cotton. You don't want to have nylon or polyester that might catch fire or could melt. You want to have, you don't want loose-fitting clothes that will be flying around that could catch on fire as well. Long pants and no sandals. Okay, you should be really careful when you open a trash can that has very fine sawdust in it, because if the fine sawdust goes airborne, it can spontaneously combust. Okay, for your clay bodies, you need to have something that's going to take the thermal shock of going from the hot kiln to whatever process we're doing. For raku, you need a nice porous body that will take the heat shock with a glaze on it. And that's the highest temperature we're going to be using in these processes. So that's at 1850. It doesn't have to be loaded with grog, but it needs to have some kind of an aggregate in it. It could be mullite, which is a very fine, you can get it in a very fine grit, or malachite is a nice porcelain grog you can use, or just sawdust, a little bit of fine sawdust in your clay, wedge it in. So there's different ways you can make your clay suitable for raku firings. I'm using Coleman porcelain for my various techniques except for raku, and I'm not adding anything to it for the lower temperature firing. Basically, I use it in the Sagar, Ovara, and horsehair, and it's just straight out of the box. I'm bisque firing the pieces with terra sigillata for those firings to 09, and for the raku, I bisque fire to 04. And so they're still pretty open bodies. They're just a bisque temperature, so they're very porous. On the DVD, there's a PDF. It has a shopping list for everything you'll need to get you started. We're going to talk about glazes that you can use for raku. You can buy commercial glazes. You can mix your own. You can use low fire glazes. If you want to have the bright colors work, you can fire them to 04 and then put them in the raku kiln at 06, and they will retain their brightness. You just have to play around with it. If you want to lower a cone 04 glaze to an 06 for raku, put a little teaspoon of a flux in there, like 3134 or Gerstli borate, into the jar and mix it up, and it should mature at 06. So basically look at your cone numbers and you'll know how to adjust it. If you Google raku glazes, you can find lots of recipes online. You can go to Ceramic Arts Daily, they have some you can download. I'm going to be decorating some slabs for raku, and I'm going to be using the latex resist. So the first thing I do is to make a drawing on each slab, and then I'll go back and fill it in with latex. Then when the latex dries, I'll glaze it, pull the latex off, and go back in and decorate with a luster line for the raku firing. So right now I'm just going to do a horse. And I lived in Montana for 31 years, so I really got to see a lot of wild horses up in the Pryor Mountains, which was about an hour away from my home. And one time I was up there with my class. We were going to dig clay, and we were digging clay up there, and as we went along the top of the ridge on Overlook Mountain, we were surrounded by a herd of wild horses that came out of a cloud, and it was really kind of a magical moment for all of us, and so that's when I started doing the wild horses on raku slabs. So I've been doing them since about the mid-'80s. I'm just going to do some lively action things, maybe a pasture scene here on the next one. This will be a wild bronco. And I took a lot of figure drawing when I was an art student, and I think it really helps because whether it's an animal or a human, there's always the aspect of weight and balance. And so if you're drawing a horse or you're drawing a figure, you still have to worry about that weight distribution and the right anatomy too. Okay, so that's one. And I drew a couple little sketches for ideas of what I want to put on the other ones. So I think on this one I'm going to do more of a pasture scene. So I'm going to draw some grazing horses. Okay, so now I have the rough design in there, and I'm going to go back and put the latex all over the figures, the horse figures, and then I'll let it dry and I'll prepare some glaze to spray over it. Okay, before I put my brushes in latex, I'm going to protect them with a little bit of shout, and I'll dampen them a little bit. And it helps to clean them better, and the latex doesn't stick on it. I don't like to ruin these brushes. They're nice brushes. So I'll rub it into the fibers first before I dip it in the latex. Then I can clean it easier. Okay, so they should be well coated. So I'm using Amico rubber latex, and I've diluted it a little bit because I like it to flow when I'm painting. And I like to have a thick ridge around the edge so that when I go to peel it off, it comes off easily. Okay, so the latex has been applied and it's going to dry pretty quickly, and I will get the glaze ready to spray on it, and then I can remove the latex. So I'm going to clean out my brushes and get ready for the next step. Okay, so I'm going to apply the glaze with the brush. I usually spray it on because I like to get a light coat, but I don't have access to a sprayer here, so I'm just going to brush on some commercial glaze. And this is from Mako raku glazes. So we'll see how this works. And I'm just brushing it on with a nice glaze brush. Try to get a nice even coat. So this will be the background glaze. And I usually reduce them from the kiln on straw, and I get a nice varied textured surface. So hopefully any kind of brush strokes won't show. And I go right over the latex because I like it that it leaves the edge. Like I said, I just use a thin coat usually, and I get a lot of nice light colors. And I like it matte. I guess if I did 2 coats, I could cover up better, but I don't know what this glaze does, so I'm going to just put 1 coat on. Okay, so now I'm going to remove the latex with the needle tool, and I start by one end and pick it up and peel it off. I usually clean the glaze off of there so it doesn't splatter like it's doing. But so I'm just going to keep taking this off. It came off really good. Okay. So now it's ready to go back in with a luster line and do some drawing with the luster glaze. Okay, so now I'm ready to do the luster lines on the horse drawings. So I have a little slip applicator with a somewhat fine point on it with the copper penny glaze. I'm just going to start Okay, so we'll see how that turns out tomorrow. And I'll do the other ones. They'll take a little longer. This is a piece I made with just scraping off the insides of some of the underglaze jars and inlaying it in a slab of clay on a little hump mold. And I'm hoping that the white glaze will let the colors show through. So I'm just going to do some stripes with the white glaze, do contrast with the black raku, and hopefully a lot of color, like confetti. I think it's an easy way to get color. Okay, so that should be that one. Hopefully when it's fired, this will be dark. Maybe the slips will show up a different color, and they'll be white with the colors coming through, I hope. We'll see what happens in the raku, you never know. Okay, and I'm going to glaze this one with some of the copper penny and the white. Okay, I'm going to finish up putting some stripes on here with masking tape. And it's just a simple way to get a pattern on there. You could use like stickers, like stars or circles, whatever suits your fancy. I'm going to go all the way over here because I'm going to do a little copper penny on the buttons on the side of this thing. So just get that edge. And I basically want to make sure the tape is down solid on the edges, so it leaves a straight line for the brush. So I guess that's okay. Okay, so I'm ready to put some glaze on here. So I think first I'm going to use the raku coppery glaze, and then the real shiny copper penny. I want to get a good solid glaze on here, unlike the other pieces. Now I won't go all the way to the bottom. Keep going all the way around. This is just a simple form made over a cardboard tube, and I wrap paper around the cardboard tube, and then I wrap the clay around it, and I can slide the tube off with the paper sleeve, so it works pretty slick. Because you don't want the clay to dry on the tube or it'll crack. So just sliding it off. Usually it'll stand up right away. Tubes are kind of self-supporting. So that should do it for those stripes. Now I want to go back and take the tape off and put on the buttons. I have some buttons on one side. So now I'm going to just put glaze on the buttons. Okay, so now I'm going to make sure all the glaze is where it ought to be. Like I saw there's a little drip on the bottom, so I'm going to wash that off because you don't want it in the kiln or sticking to the shelves. And I got a drip over here that I can erase with some water. Okay, that looks pretty good. And I'll clean up. I noticed this is got a streak where it shouldn't be, so I'm going to just clean that up. Okay, so this should be ready to go. And I always like to glaze a day ahead of time so that nothing blows up if it's still wet. So we'll get ready to glaze tomorrow. This is a 700 milliliter bottle of water, and I usually use a liter. But I'm just going to make a little bit of terra sigillata, so I cut back on the recipe. I usually use 3/4 of a liter bottle of water and then put 250 grams of ball clay in it. But I cut it down about 1/3. So before I start dumping the ball clay into the water, I'm going to put my respirator on. Oops.
Okay.
Okay, so now I'm going to shake it up, and then I'm going to put a little bit of Darvan in it and let it sit for a little while and come back and see if it's separated. If it has clear water on the top, I'll add a little more Darvan to it because I don't want the clear water. I don't want it to separate that much. I just want the heavy stuff down at the bottom. So I put in about 7 drops of Darvan. This is Darvan 7. And I'll shake it for a little bit. And then when I come back, I'll check it. All right, so we'll see how that looks in about an hour. All right, so this has sat for about an hour, and it's separated so that you can see a darker level down here, right about that much. So that's what we don't want for the terra sigillata. However, there's no clear area up top, so that's good, so it's ready to go. So what I'm going to do is punch a hole right above the dark spot. There we go. Okay, so this is the part I want. You can still see the dark layer down below, about from here down. So I don't want that, I just want the top level. And this is a pretty fast way of making terra sigillata. We'll start, this is what's left of the original mix of the ball clay and water and Darvan. And this is what I decanted by putting a hole in the bottle here. So I got the top part of the clay mix. So that's what I'm going to use for terra sigillata. And terra sigillata is an old process, originally Roman, possibly Greek, and it just means kind of settled earth. So what I'm going to do now, the piece should be bone dry, it should be real smooth, and I'm just going to start applying some very thin coats to it. And because it's dry, it'll soak in really fast. You can see it's going on thin, and it's going on and getting soaked in and drying quickly. So as soon as I get a coat on, I'll start burnishing. And I burnish with a soft sponge, kind of foam rubber or whatever you would call that, the kind of stuff that goes into pillows for cushions or egg crate mattresses. So to make sure there's a coat in all the spots, I'm wondering if I have a couple little dry spots on there. Okay, so that should be enough. So I'll burnish it in a minute as soon as I don't see any sheen on the top. Okay, I think it's ready to burnish, so I'm going to start just buffing it. And these little makeup sponges, they're very nice to use too. So you can see how it buffs up real easily. And if you want it to be shinier, you can keep putting a few more coats on. You don't want to get too thick or it can chip off. Okay, so this is the final burnishing. It looks pretty good, it's pretty shiny. I'm happy with it. So that'll get bisqued to cone 09 so that I don't lose the shine. And then it'll go into either a Sager or an Elvira firing or horsehair firing. So that's ready to go. Okay, this morning I'm going to prepare a Sager firing or a pot for a Sager firing. This is a piece of pottery made out of porcelain. I'm using Coleman porcelain, and I put terra sigillata on it and burnished it and fired it to 09, cone 09 in a bisque. And This is just a normal flower pot that I'm using as a sagger because it's an easy way to do it if you don't have time to make saggers, or if you're dropping by to do a sagger firing. And so you could just use something like that. And then I have the lid. And what this does is it encloses all the combustibles to make an environment that will etch the surface of the pot. So I'm going to prepare a few things to put in here. First off, I'm going to put some wood chunks in, and I lay that around. And I have the hole sealed up with a piece of kiln shelf. And I like to keep the pot up above the combustibles so that it doesn't get all crunchy or whatever I put in there. And I put in a lot of different things. Sometimes I put copper nitrate. I have a mix of copper carbonate with salt and a sawdust that's going to go on top of this layer of sawdust. And to make marks on the pot, I've been using bronze wool instead of steel wool. The steel wool leaves a brown, kind of warm, rusty color, and sometimes it'll flash green. So that's what I've been playing around with lately. So I've been using copper I get from electricians, or that, you know, from old appliances that don't work anymore. Just strip out the wire. So I'm going to put some wool and wire on this piece. What I'm going to do is cut off some of this. This is from my neighbor's lamp I found in the garbage. And I think I might put a little bit of this copper foil tape on here. And that's an interesting thing to play around with too. This is what stained glass artists use. And it has tape on it, so you can use that and stick it on to make a pattern. So right now I'm using the bronze wool, a very fine amount of it. This is the fine kind, and then there's a coarser type. It's just like steel wool, except it's made with bronze, which is copper and tin. If it's touching a lot, like if it's really clumped up close, it'll make a black, very deep black. And then lighter amounts of it will make like squiggles, like a quick sketch line, which I really like. And let's see, it fell off of there. Sometimes it does, it's so light it does fall away. And I might have to tape this down with something. It's a slippery surface there. I'm actually just going to stick this inside to hold it on. Once you get something on there nice and solid, it'll stay. But it doesn't want to stick. There we go. Okay. Okay, so I'll see what I can do. I'm going to now put on a respirator to load up the chemicals and the sawdust. Some of the other chemicals I've used in here are copper nitrate squirted on, ferric chloride squirted on, ferric chloride dropped in the sawdust, and that's about what I usually use. You can use organic material, banana skins, ketchup, whatever you want to throw in there. It's really wide open for things that you can experiment with. Orange peels are a good thing to try because there's phosphorus in that. I'm going to put on a dust respirator so I don't inhale any of these dusts from the copper or the sawdust. Here's that. Okay, so the kiln shelf is in there, and I have the wood chips and then the sawdust, and then I'm going to sprinkle some sawdust mixed with copper carbonate that has about 2/3 to 3/4 salt and 1/4 copper carbonate. And then about just some sawdust for kicks here. Should mix it up a little bit. Okay, and that should do it. And now I'm going to put the pot in there, hopefully on a clean kiln shelf bit. And I'm going to stuff some pieces down inside because the bottom part nothing will lay on it, but I want some visual activity down there, so I'm going to just try and get some pieces of copper wedged in that will barely touch the surface, but they'll have an impact. Okay, so that should do it, and then I'm going to cover it with a lid to hold the chemicals and the combustion and the smoke and all the activity inside of there. Okay, so now it's ready to go into the kiln, so I'll take it out to the kiln and we will fire it up to about 1650, hold it for 20 minutes, and then let it cool and take it out when it's about 200 or touchable, and see what happened. Okay, I'm going to make a crackle surface pot mostly for the Obara firing, and I really like the way the Obara firing reacts to that crackled surface, so I thought I should demonstrate how to get that. So I'm going to smooth the surface first. It's pretty smooth, but okay, and I'm going to put some some sodium silicate on this surface. And I have a brush here. So let the pot set up a little bit before I put the sodium silicate on it so that it is not quite so wet, and the sodium silicate will dry faster. And then I'm going to help it along with a heat gun. Okay, so that should be enough. And now I'm going to dry it. So I don't want to see any sheen on there before I start pushing out. It's almost ready. I think that'll do. Okay, so I'm going to take a small wooden rib, and first I'll wet the inside. I hope it's not too dry. Okay. The sodium silicate seals on the top surface, and so when it goes to stretch, it cracks. And that's what creates the pattern. It's just the cracking top surface. So you can't touch the outside once you start doing this because you'll mess up the pattern of the crackles. I really like the deep crevices. That gets really good coloring in the Obara firing. Just have to be careful not to go through the wall doing this. Okay, that looks pretty good. Try to get that shape a little smoother. All right. So I'm going to fire some of these in the Obara cone so you can see what this texture does. I just really love what it does. So it's a cool surface. Okay, so I'm ready to load up for raku firing, and I have a couple of slabs and some other pieces, and I like to fire the slabs leaning against bricks. So I'm going to load them up like this. There is a nice coating of kiln wash to protect it from the glaze. I'm putting these up so that there's not a flat line of a barrier for the flame so that you can get heat under the pieces. Okay, so I'm going to start loading up the slabs, and it's kind of a narrow kiln. Okay, so I have 4 pieces in here, 2 slabs and a dish and a cylinder. And I'm going to turn it on and start it up. And this firing goes to 1850. And then after it hits that temperature, we take the kiln off and put it in a reduction chamber of newspaper and straw or whatever we have around. So that's the process, and it should take about 45 minutes to hit temperature. So we'll start out slow and turn it up every few minutes, about every 5 minutes. Okay, there's 2 valves on the burner and the tank, so I'm going to turn the gas on first at the tank, and then I'm going to turn the burner gas on. Okay, and then I'll adjust it. Okay, and then I'll put it in, line it up for there. Okay, so you want to have a lot of secondary air going into this because it's no blower, it's a natural draft, so you don't want to have it too much in the kiln. It should be outside of the kiln, and it should be able to bring in air around it. So I'm going to just go really slow right now, and then I'll have a barometer to watch the temperature. I have my safety goggles on, my apron, my fire-resistant apron, and my heat-proof gloves. And I'm going to put my respirator on now and get ready to take the pots out of the kiln. Go straight up. Okay, so we'll see what that looks like in about 20 minutes or so. So we're going to open up the cans now and see what happened with the raku pieces. So the color came through the white in a few places. It looks pretty good. Didn't get as black as I'd like it, but that's okay. It's interesting. Ooh, this got some nice color. You never know when you use new glazes what's going to happen, but it got better color, so I'm pretty happy with that one. Here's this one. Got a little bit of iridescent on it. I think it was hotter on one side than the other. And this one is pretty coppery. I like it when it gets more blues in it, but it's not bad. I like that one. So all in all, I think it was pretty good firing. Okay, I have my horsehair pots in the kiln ready to go, and I have them lined up because I'm going to pull them out onto that sand, so I want to be able to stand over there and grab them. So I'm thinking ahead of time where they are in here. So I'm going to try and get this, about even distance around the shelf. Okay, Then I'll adjust it. Okay. And then I'll put it in, line it up for there. This is going to fire to about 1100 to 1150, and then I'll put it on the sand with horsehair and feathers. While that's heating up, I'm going to get the feathers and the horsehair ready. So I like to lay them out, stick them in some sand so they can stay there, not blow away. And stick the stem in there. Okay, so that's for the one pot. I'm spacing them apart so that it's not too overloaded with feathers because they're kind of small pots. So I like to have enough white space to get a good contrast and not have it all black. This process is for horsehair and feathers. One pot I'll try to get just horsehair on, and the other pot I'll try to get just feathers on. And I usually have a bigger bed that I can roll it farther, but this will work. And I just roll it around on the feathers and the horsehair, and it's real fast. If the pot gets too cool, it doesn't smoke on very well. So you have to do it quickly while it's hot. At home, I have ducks in my backyard, and I collect feathers whenever they get into a ruckus. But these are from Michael's, and they're about $2 a bag, and they're really easy to get a hold of. So there's quite an assortment of feathers at Michael's. Or you can go to a turkey farm before Thanksgiving. Okay, I'm going to put some horsehair down on this side and just a couple pieces so it's not too heavily put on there. And I sometimes like to make patterns with it so it's interesting. So right now we're lucky there's no breeze. That should work. So hopefully it'll stay there till we're ready. I'm going to turn up the gas a little bit. This is on really low. It's barely ignited. And then I turned it up just a little bit, like not even a 32nd of an inch on the circumference. And this is going to turn it up a little bit more because the parameter slowed down in climbing. So when that happens, I'd give it more gas. And you can hear the difference in the gas line. And you can always drop it on top if you want. Okay, I'm loading these saggers on a hot shelf, so I put a couple of bits of kiln shelf and some stilts to separate them so the earthenware doesn't crack right on the hot shelf. So that's just a precaution measure on my part. And I staggered the height just because they didn't quite fit next to each other on there. So that's just trying to be efficient in loading it up. So these are ready to go. I have 2 pots in there, and we're going to fire it up to 1650 degrees. There we go. So this should take about 45 minutes to reach temperature. We're at 1650. So now I want to hold it for about 10 minutes. Okay, so it's set for about 10 minutes to make sure everything was combusted inside. So now we're just going to let it cool to about 200, 300 degrees, and then we can open it up. Okay, so the kiln is cooled to about 164 degrees, so that's cool enough to open it up. So it's open, and now I'm going to see what happened in there. So it looks like I got a lot of wire in there. A little hot, so I'll just grab a tong or something and pull them out. So you see the colorants, you can see the green flashing from the copper. So that's how it works. Let's see what this one looks like. Okay, so the strip there is from the foil. That was because it was tilted over. It got a lot more black on one side, but I like it. And the peachy colors from the copper in the sawdust. So this is the copper foil. This is some of the bronze wool. And looks pretty good. I like all the bright colors down below. Great colors. So I'm pretty happy with that. I really like the green and the peach and the black together. There's a slight crack in this sagger, but it could be used again. Maybe put a little paper clay over it just to seal it up better. I make my own saggers out of raku clay, and they've lasted quite a while. So it's worth the time and energy if you can do it, but if you can't, these work just fine. So good firing. Okay, I'm going to do one more use of a raku kiln, and this is an Obara firing. So this goes up to 1650 degrees, and when the piece comes out, rather than smoking it in a can with a combustible, it's going to be dipped in a solution of flour, yeast, and sugar and water. And it has some amazing results. Supposedly this is a Eastern European technique or possibly Siberian. And it was originally used to seal the clay. So it's becoming pretty popular just because the effects are so beautiful. So I'm going to load this up and fire a batch. And I'm just doing it on the stilts because of it's hot. Okay, so I'll get the little one first. Oh. So that got some nice toasty colors on it. And I have a good grip on this one. Okay, so that's Obara. Now the advantage of this is that there's no smoke, so it could be done in an urban setting. So it's pretty interesting. I'm going to dump the water out of this one because it's hard to clean if it dries up in there. Okay, turn that over. That got some nice coloring on it. Look at this one. We didn't get too much lichen development. A little bit in here, but pretty nice coloration. Well, you don't get it in the Obara, it stays white. There's a lot of experimenting to do there, but it's a lot of fun. Okay, now I'm going to put some wax on a Sager fired piece. This has been cleaned and dried so that it will take the wax. You don't want to put wax on a damp pot because it just doesn't work. It won't be sucked in there. So I'm going to take some floor paste wax. Johnson's paste will work. This is tree wax. And the new tree wax comes with a nice applicator. So I'm just going to brush it on or wipe it on. And this just helps give it a boost. It enhances the colors and seals it somewhat. I still wouldn't put water in these, but it just makes them not nick so much because, you know, it's a delicate surface with the terra sigillata on there. This tree wax is really old, but my applicator is new with my new jar of tree wax, but it still works. I'm very happy with the colors I got. I'm going to buff this with a piece of silk rag that is from my husband's Hawaiian shirts because it's nice and smooth. So this is what it looks like finished. So I really like the colors on it. I like the cloud in here. I think that was from a more intense heat on the side with the wood chips. And there's a peach halo. So I like that. There's a little tinge of green on this side. I'm very happy with these. We have just fired 4 different processes in a raku kiln. So I'm going to go over each process a little bit and explain it again, what happened, what we're doing, and the temperatures. So this is horsehair and feathers. That's feathers. This is horsehair. I'm using porcelain clay. You can use earthenware in this as well. I have terra sigillata on it, burnished, fired to cone 09. And then this is fired in a raku kiln to 1150, taken out, and the horsehair of the feathers are applied to the surface and they're burned into the surface. If you get any kind of globs of ash or bubbly soot or whatever, you can clean it off with an oven cleaner, just with a sponge. Don't scrub it. Okay, so that's horsehair and feathers. This is Sager firing, and I'm following Charlie and Linda Briggs's method of firing, usually in a Sager. I make my own Sagers, but you can use something like this. Again, this is porcelain with a terra sigillata on it, and then I have been using more copper wire and copper carbonate in the sawdust with salt. I use a 3-part salt to 1 part copper carbonate stirred up and then mixed in with some sawdust, and that goes on a bed of wood and sawdust, wood chips and sawdust, so that it burns it up. And it gets some nice flashing from the fire in the bottom of the Sager. So this is from the copper, and this is from the copper wire, and there's a little bit of green in there. So then this is fired to 1650, held for about 10 to 20 minutes so that everything combusts in the Sager, and then it's let to cool. Come back and take it out when it's touchable. You don't want to take it out too fast. This is waxed after it's cleaned up. If you want to wash it first, let it sit for a day so it's dry before you put the wax on, because it'll get gummy. So you just want to buff it on with a shoe polish brush, or they come with applicators now, and then buff it with a piece of soft cloth like a t-shirt or a silk Hawaiian shirt or whatever you have around. And so that'll seal it and make it a little bit more durable so it doesn't scratch, because it is a delicate surface. Okay, when you're done, after you clean these up, you can put wax on this too, and it makes it a little bit more durable as well. So you want to clean it up, let it dry, and then you can buff them with wax. So this is the Avara firing, and this is an Eastern European or Eastern Russian technique where you fire the pieces up to 1650, take them out of the kiln and dip them in a solution of wheat, yeast, and sugar in water. And the recipe is 2.5 gallons of water, 2 cups of wheat or flour, and I have just been using just white enriched flour from the grocery store. Then 2 packs of yeast and 2 tablespoons of sugar. Make it 3 days ahead of time and keep stirring it, and it will be really frothy by the time you're ready to use it. And it really smells bad. It smells like beer. Some people have been adding a little beer to see what happens. Some people use a different kind of flour, but I just use the regular white flour. So this is a vara, and it's just kind of like reducing in water instead of like we do raku in a combustible fiery atmosphere. So that's what you get with it. Sometimes you get a nice lichen development. It really works well on textures. And you can do it pretty fast. You can really stack them in the kiln and just keep taking them out until it gets too cold and then heat it up again. Okay, so that's a vara. Now, raku originally developed as a part of the tea ceremony in Japan, but in America or in the United States, we use it as a fast firing process. And it was popularized by Hal Rigger and Paul Soldner, Piepenberg, quite a few others. And what it is you take the pieces up to about 1850, which is 06, and pull them out of the kiln. These are glazed. These are the only ones that have a glaze on them. And you take them and put them into a combustible chamber like leaves, straw, newspaper. Put a lid on it and let it smoke for about 20 minutes, or half an hour, or till it stops smoking. So the smoke goes into the bare parts of the surface. So this is, the black here is no glaze. And I used a couple different resists here. This was latex resist, this was tape, and this was just not glazing. So you still get the black where you just don't glaze. And this is a luster fire or luster glaze used, applied with a syringe. And this was brushed on. So that's brushed on too, that's a copper glaze. So that's the difference between all these different methods. Thanks for watching this DVD, and I hope this has piqued your interest in alternative firing methods. You can do a lot with a little raku kiln, and good luck.
Ha ha ha.